Sarah is 90, Abram's about 100, and God says, you're going to have some kids, which we were laughing last week because that's what Sarai did. She laughed when God said that promise. And if you look carefully at what she's saying, essentially she's saying the plumbing just doesn't work anymore, you know. And then I think she has faith that God can do it, but her life experience for 90 years is that he hasn't. And I think we can identify with that struggle. You know, we've got a promise from God, but it hasn't come out that way. And so as we pick up the story, at the end of we're at Genesis chapter 19 today. In chapter 17, God comes back and he promises them again. And then all of a sudden, inserted into this story are the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. But let me back up, because one of the characters we're going to be meeting again in Sodom and Gomorrah is Abraham's nephew Lot. If you remember, Lot's dad passed, was a brother of Abraham, and Abraham took Lot into his family and treated him like a firstborn son. And both Abraham and Lot became very wealthy. Their herds increased to the point that they were starting to have some struggles. Two very successful people trying to live in a small area. And Abraham's solution was, hey, Lot, look at all of my kingdom. You pick what part of it you want, and I'll take what you don't choose. And that's when we begin to see that there's a series of strategic mistakes that Lot makes in his choosing. And so if I were to lay out the differences, Abraham is looking mostly through the eyes of faith in God, and his relationship to God is determining most of what he does, not all, but most. Where Lot comes at it from a totally worldly point of view, where God is a minor part of it. So it's the emphases in their lives. Because Lot's decision making is coming from a worldview, he's making decisions that worldly make sense, but spiritually it doesn't. And so in the end of chapter 18, remember, Lot chose to put his family and his kids in Sodom and Gomorrah. And by the way, before he did that, we were told that these two cities were very exceedingly wicked, and yet Lot chooses to put his family there. As parents and grandparents, that's something we want to pay attention to, is where we're going to put our kids and make our living, because as you're making your living, your kids are playing with the kids in the neighborhood, and they're going to get influenced. It's not that you don't want your kids involved in all with the world, but just be careful about the choices you make. And so as they're going into Sodom and Gomorrah, all of a sudden in this picture, God enters the story again, and he says to Abraham, I'm going to destroy these cities because they're very wicked. And we're going to find out what that wickedness was here in a little bit. And Abraham has the faith to plead with God about not doing that. And so the number is thrown out of 50. And God says, okay, if there's 50 righteous people in that city, I won't touch it. Well, Abraham knows something about Lot, and he gets God all the way down to 10. For the sake of 10, God agrees, I will not destroy that city. I wish Abraham would have gone down to 5, because that would have made it. Yeah. But at 10, it doesn't make it. So then we pick up the story in chapter 19. That evening, the two angels, these were the two that visited Abraham, they left to go to Sodom and Gomorrah, and the Lord stayed with Lot and reaffirmed the promise. So these guys now enter the picture again, these two angels. They came to the entrance to the city of Sodom. So in the Old Testament, if you wanted to conduct business, you went out to the city gates, and that's typically where the men hung out, and they did their business, while in the city, the women and children went about what they were involved in. But it was a place of commerce where people could gather and do those things. So that's why the city gate plays in so much in the Old Testament. Lot was sitting there, and when he saw them, let me put my glasses on so I can see better. That's better. When he saw them, he stood up to meet them. Then he welcomed them and bowed his face to the ground. My lords, he said, come to my house and wash your feet and be my guests for the night. You may then get up early in the morning and be on your way again. What's cool about what Lot does is he's showing the hospitality of a believer. And that is, if someone is in need, you reach out, you do what you can for them. Okay? Now, did he understand that these angelic beings were different? Maybe they were more Israeli in their acting. I don't know, but he seems to recognize something as we move through the story, that he's got some kind of a kinship relationship with these two people. But he's practicing hospitality, inviting them into his house. So far, so good. Oh no, they replied, we'll just spend the night out here in the city square. But Lot insisted. And by the way, we're going to find out that in the city square at night, a lot of wickedness happened. And these guys, I don't know whether they were testing Lot to see if he would actually let them stay out there. And was it the fear of what happened in the city square at night what led him to do that? I'm not sure of all these things, but just kind of highlighting a few of the details on that story for you there. Okay. But Lot insisted, so that at last they went home with him. Lot prepared a feast for them, complete with fresh bread made without yeast, and they ate. But before they retired for the night, all of the men of Sodom, now notice the description there, all of the men of Sodom, young and old, came from all over the city and surrounded the house. They shouted to Lot, where are the men who came to spend the night with you? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them. So we begin to understand a little bit why God was so concerned about the sins that were piling up in Sodom. So you've got the sin of homosexual sex, but you also have a sin that has permeated every man in the community. You see that? It had become so accepted that they all jump into this particular sin. Fads have a way of doing that. Well, just look at TikTok fads and some of the dangerous things kids are willing to do because they see the TikTok challenge and it draws them in. But here you see that all of the men of the city, young and old, were involved in this, and that's their response to the guests that Lot has in his house. Okay? Lot's going to step out into this, and as a dad and a grandpa, I do not understand how he reached the solution that we're about to read about. Because as a dad, it's the last thing I would ever do. Okay, but here's the solution. So Lot stepped outside to talk with them, shutting the door behind him. Please, my brothers, notice his address to them. Not men of the city, not, hey guys, my brothers. Again, that goes back to the business relationship. That's what he's used to dealing with them on. He begged, don't do such a wicked thing. So he makes a judgment, does he not, about the sins that are going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, and he's calling that behavior wicked. The scriptures do that time and time again about that behavior and many others. I'm not going to apologize for what God says. I'm just going to present what the Word of God says, okay? And I don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers, but I'm not going to, as a Jesus Bible-believing Christian, I'm not going to say something that God doesn't. And I'm not going to go where he does not go, okay? So here he calls it what God calls it. He calls that sin wickedness. Is that the only sin that's called wicked? No. But in the context of Sodom and Gomorrah, he nails it for what it is. And here he comes with his solution. Look, I have 2 virgin daughters. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do with them as you wish. But please, leave these men alone, for they are my guests and under my protection. I would like to sit down with Father Lot and talk through that decision. Because biblically speaking, a father's primary protective role is over his family. And Lot steps outside of that to protect guys that he just met at the city gate.
But is that possibly because women did not have status in that society?
They didn't have status when it came to business. So I want to make this caveat. When you see the way women are treated in the scriptures, especially in a situation like this, God is not endorsing that kind of relationship. This is just a commentary on how it was. If you look at how God elevates women in both the Old Testament and especially Jesus in the New Testament, and you going back to when God first introduced Eve on the scene, this is someone who is to stand beside him in life. God never devalues anyone because of their gender, sex, their assigned at birth, whatever we call it today. But in the culture, yes, culturally, women at this time were often seen as property. That's still seen today in some religions where you can divorce your wife if she burns your cup of coffee. Yeah. But it bears noting that in the society as God established it, man, woman, husband, wife relationship, and they are to be fruitful and marry and have kids. That basic unit, that's where the father is to be the shepherd and pastor over his family. And Lot steps outside of that. And he's more concerned about entertaining his guests. Did he recognize them as being different, angelic? I don't know, but still his solution falls far short of what a father should do for his family. Any comments, questions? Lot must have had at least 4 daughters, because we'll find out that he's got some that are engaged. He's got some that may well be married, and then he's got the 2 young virgin girls. So 4, 6 daughters, we're not exactly sure. But if he has, let's say he has 6 daughters and his wife, that would make 8. If 2 are married, that could have been the 10. But we're going to meet his sons-in-law in a minute and find out something about those guys too, especially Lot. Any comments, questions here? Do we need to take an aside on homosexuality in the scriptures? Or have I said enough? Okay. Most of us, if not all of us, probably know people who are caught up in that lifestyle. My only surviving sister is, and I love her as much as I can, but I don't endorse that part of her lifestyle. I'll do this much. I'll say this much. When my sister first came out, we had been married less than 3 years. I handled it wrong. I was a seminary guy full of knowledge and not much love, and I thumped her upside the head and back with the Bible and almost destroyed any opportunity I had to engage her in conversation. I did it wrong. Thankfully, my sister is long-suffering and forgiving, and we have a good relationship today too. And I love her, I love her partner, but I do not endorse their lifestyle and changes. Whenever they visit us, they typically don't stay at our house, because my insistence would be they would have to stay in separate bedrooms, because that's the value system in the house that I'm shepherd over. And they've chosen not to do that, but I love her as much as you could love one of your siblings. Okay? All right? Let's see what the men react. So Lot says, "But please leave these men alone, for they are my guests and under my protection." "Stand back," they shouted. "This fellow came to us as an outsider." They're speaking about Lot. Remember, he came there as an adult, well-established and wealthy, okay? And now he's acting like our judge. Isn't it funny that whenever you get to talking to somebody about sin, that one of their first reactions is, "Don't judge me"? There is an art to doing that. And the art is this, and it's exactly what you see in Jesus. It's the art of being able to love a person without accepting their sin. And it's not easy to do, but it's important to be able to love somebody and not endorse the choices that they've made. As parents, we do that all the time with our kids, right? And I think it should be the same. And one of the prime examples I would turn to you to understand what Jesus did. There was a story in the Gospels of the Pharisees caught a woman in adultery, and they bring her to Jesus. Now, to commit adultery, you have to have 2 people, right? They only bring her. They bring her, and they ask Jesus, they're trying to trap him, what should we do with her? Should we stone her, as the law says, or whatever? And Jesus, being Jesus and smart as heck, he says he stooped down and he drew something in the sand. I don't know what it was. Did he write the name of the guy? Did he write the sins of the, I don't know what he wrote down there, but whatever it was powerful. And he stood up and he looked at them. He said, let he who's without sin cast the first stone. And they drop their rocks and walk away. And then Jesus turns to the woman, and she's wondering, are you going to condemn me like every other religious leader I've ever met? And he challenges her, go and leave your life of sin. You see how he loved her, didn't endorse her sin, and then gave her a challenge? That's, I think, the model of how we deal with people caught in sin, is to be able to love them. There's about 100% chance that anyone in your life is going to sin against you. It's almost guaranteed. So how are you going to deal with it? With forgiveness ultimately predominating. I keep getting off the subject here, but I think it's important, okay? We'll treat you far worse than these other men. And they lunged toward Lot to break down the door. But the two angels reached out and pulled Lot into the house and bolted the door. Then they blinded the men, young and old, who were at the door of the house, so they gave up trying to get inside. You want to talk about the mercy and grace of God? Lot would be powerless against a mob of people, and God intervenes and he protects them. And notice, he doesn't wipe out the men of the city. He just stops them in their tracks from doing what they were going to do. And from what I'm gathering from the story, this was not lifelong blindness, but it was an instantaneous, in-the-moment blindness. They couldn't find their way out until God finally solves the situation. Okay? Any comments there? All right. Meanwhile, the angels question Lot. Do you have any other relatives here in the city? They asked. Get them out of this place, your sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone else. For we are about to destroy this city completely. The outcry against this place is so great, it has reached the Lord, and he has sent us to destroy it. The imagery in the Hebrew is not that God finally heard about it, like someone sent him an email, hey dude, you see what's going on down here? But that God's grace limit had been reached and they had gone past that part. Okay? Like when you blow a fuse at somebody. That's the picture behind the words here in Hebrew, is that God had just finally reached his limit. We saw that before when it came to the flood. We saw that again. Just had it in my head a minute ago. The Tower of Babel. And God steps in to intervene. Now, was this the only sin of the city? I would say probably not. When there's business, there's often shenanigans. So there's probably many sins, but the one that's highlighted here is the one we've been talking about. So Lot rushed out to get his daughter's fiancés. Quick, get out of this city, the Lord is about to destroy it. But the young man thought he was only joking. Let me kind of put this in context. If they're marrying Lot's daughters, they probably interacted with Lot many times throughout the courtship process. And in the Old Testament series of marriage, there were 3 steps to the marriage. The first one is the dad of a daughter I liked when my daughter was young, and that is the dad gets with the bride's dad and they decide if this is going to be a good match. My daughter hated that. She didn't want me picking out her husband. I tried to tell her it was biblical, and she said, Old Testament stuff, I want that. And then the couple would go through an engagement period or a betrothal. You'll see this in the story of Mary and Joseph. In the betrothal stage, the community considered them to be married, but they had not yet consummated it on their wedding night. So it was you are, but not yet. And then on the day of the wedding, when the bridegroom would come and gather his bride and have a big party, that night typically they would consummate it. So they're in that, these fiancés are in that betrothal stage, okay? So they had interacted with Lot. And all of a sudden, Lot comes in and he starts talking the God talk, and what's their reaction? They laugh. Why? I'm guessing maybe Lot had never talked about God before, and all of a sudden you're talking about God and they didn't know anything else to do but react. I cannot prove that. That's just my assumption, that when he starts talking about God and destruction, it's like, dude, we've never heard that from you before. And they giggle, they laugh. They thought he was joking. At dawn the next morning, the angels became insistent. Hurry, they said to Lot. That's interesting. Did they become insistent because he's dragging his feet? I don't know. But it's interesting that the scriptures throw that word in here. That all of a sudden, as it's about to be dawn, the urgency level just went up to DEFCON 4. Take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here. I'm guessing it's the 2 that he had offered up the night before. Get out right now, or you will be swept away in the destruction of the city. When Lot still hesitated, the angel seized his hand and the hands of his wife and 2 daughters and rushed them to safety outside the city. For the Lord was merciful. That is a loaded phrase, isn't it, in the midst of all this? You see the mercy of God. I've said this before to you guys. God in the scriptures vents his anger unabated only twice. The first time God's anger is vented with no stop to it is when Jesus is on the cross. And that's when you understand that what happened to Jesus on the cross, it wasn't what the Roman soldiers and the Jewish people did to him, which unpleasant as it was. But what killed Jesus, and Paul makes a big point out about this in the book of Romans, was the fact that God's anger was vented on Jesus unabated. Because in my favorite Bible passage, 2 Corinthians 5:21, God made him who never sinned to become sin for us, so that in him we could be made right with God. And what that passage says so clearly is that on the cross, Jesus was the embodiment of every sin ever committed, past, present, future. And then when Jesus cries out on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? His father literally turned his father face away and showed Jesus the anger that Jesus had never seen from him before. And so what killed Jesus was God's anger at punishing all the sin that Jesus embodied on the cross. And as that passage in 2 Corinthians says, so that we could be made right with God. That's the whole purpose of it all. The only other time the scriptures talk about when the anger of God will flow unabated is at the second coming of Christ, after the believers have been taken to heaven. That's the only other time that it flows unabated. So in the midst of this terrible story, you see the mercy of God right there. Because every other judgment you look at in scripture, there's always a but this happened, or these people were saved and it wasn't as bad as it could have been. There's always that hint of mercy in all of it. Even in the flood, for example, as horrible as that was, it wiped out all the human race, save one family, there's the grace. But in those 2 other instances, the anger of God has no abatement to it at all. And you get a hint at how destructive this is going to be in verse 17. When they were safely out of the city. But did I go too far? Okay, no, yeah, verse 15. Get out now, or you will be swept away in the destruction of the city. That sounds pretty severe. Now, where am I, people? Help me. 17. Oh, thank you. That was when you get old. When they were safely out of the city, one of the angels ordered them, run for your lives and don't look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Okay? Run, don't look back, don't stop. Pretty clear instructions, right? Escape to the mountains, so they're told where to go, or you will be swept away. Oh no, my Lord, Lot begged. You have been so gracious to me and saved my life, and you have shown such great kindness. But I cannot go to the mountains. Disaster would catch up to me there, and I would soon die. See, there is a small village nearby. Please, let me go there instead. Don't you see how small it is? Then my life will be saved. So he's stepping a little bit on the grace of God here. Now, why was he afraid of the mountains? Had he done some business deals with those people up there? Did the mountain people not like him? There's all sorts of things we can wonder about. He don't want to go there. We know that. By the way, it's kind of hard to hide in a small city, isn't it? The first parish Diana and I were blessed to serve, we lived 4 miles from a village of 420 people. There was no hiding, no matter how tall the corn was. It was rural Nebraska. Most atlases didn't even have the city on it. It was so small. But you couldn't hide in Hampton, Nebraska. After being there, when we were there 5 years, I knew everybody, their kids and their dog's name. I'm not kidding. Cats, I don't care for cats, so I didn't get to know the cats. And Diana would giggle because if I would drive, was it 6 miles to Aurora, and I was going to go pick up milk, I could be in the store for an hour and a half because I knew everybody, and they would, wanted to talk. But you can't hide in a small city, but Lot thinks he can. But he's making a bargain with God. All right, the angel said, I will grant your request. See, the Lord hears and he answers prayer. Sometimes he says yes, sometimes no. And the third option I like to say is, you're not ready for it yet. When you are, I'll give it to you. All right, the angel said, I will grant you your request. I will not destroy the little village, but hurry. You still get this idea that he's lingering. Escape to it, for I can do nothing until you arrive there. This explains why the village was known as Zoar, which means little place. When we play golf on Sunday, what's Zoar? The hole. On the green, that Zoar hole.
Depends on whether or not you're wearing your glasses.
Huh?
Depends on whether or not you're wearing your glasses.
Oh, goodness. Lot reached the village just as the sun was rising over the horizon. Then the Lord rained down fire and burning sulfur from the sky on Sodom and Gomorrah. He utterly destroyed them, along with the other cities and villages of the plain, wiping out all the people and every bit of vegetation. But Lot's wife looked back as she was following behind him, and she turned to a pillar of salt. Pretty severe. But God said, don't stop, run, hurry. And she looked back. And what a human thing to do, to look back. But God was very clear, don't do that. Now, does that mean that she was forever condemned to hell for looking back? No. The only thing that condemns a person to hell is lack of faith in Jesus Christ, not any particular sin. Because what do you think the chances are that you and I might be sinning when we're dying? I would say probably north of 50%. And if we have to make sure we're not sinning when we die to go to heaven, who does that put the onus on? Us, not Jesus. And if it's on us, it's the wrong place. I want to turn to the book of Jude real quick. It's a very difficult book to find because it's just one chapter. And I'll probably go over it 3 times before I find it. I've already skipped it once. I should have marked it. If anybody finds Jude before I do, read verse 7.
Verse 7?
Yep.
Okay. Verse 7 or 1-7?
Just
Okay, so, as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, in a similar manner to these, having given themselves over to the sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh, are set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire.
See, we're given a warning in the New Testament about what happened in the Old Testament. And it said homosexuality and what was the abuse of flesh?
Gone after a strange flesh, and sexual immorality.
Now, that strange flesh could be a reference to whether they were eating the animals offered to God, or a God in sacrifice. It could also be that maybe their sexual appetite even went into the animal kingdom, bestiality. Could be either of those. But it's interesting that in one of the smallest book of the New Testament, boom, Sodom and Gomorrah is thrown out. Unless you think this is a myth, Jesus himself references Sodom and Gomorrah. Because there are some well-intentioned people call themselves believers that think that most of the Old Testament's a myth. Well, Jesus didn't think that, and that's good enough for me. And obviously, Jude didn't either, because it lifts it up as an example.
They now think they found the archaeology.
Yeah,
site.
yeah.
Because they were looking in the wrong place.
Yeah. I read somewhere that they were drilling down and they think they found Noah's Ark. I mean, which is cool and all that, but I don't need that proof. If you ever want to read an amazing book about how science and the scriptures confirm one another, there's a book called The Evidence of Tradition. Is that the Lee Strobel book?
No, that's not, the Leisha was,
Case of Christ.
Case of Christ.
Yeah. I got that video, it's really good. He's got some other, it's called The Evidence of Tradition, and it's kind of dated now. And even that book that you turned me on, Metaxas, he goes into the archaeology of the Pool of Bethsaida, and that was called what, Linda? I read one chapter and had to buy the book.
Something about God's not.
God's not dead.
God's not
dead, yes. Yeah, those are two excellent books. Yes, sir.
Do you think Lot's question to the men of Sodom was like a kind of like a heart check, kind of like when Solomon had the baby and the two mothers, like it was the one question that would reveal, because it was like right after, it's like, okay, we're gonna wipe it out. You think it was not literal, like it was just
Not eating and offering his daughters?
Yeah, the one question that would reveal how wicked they would become.
You know, I've never thought of it that way.
Because it was very, it worked, because they made their decision pretty swiftly after that.
Yeah, they're gonna come in the house and get the guys?
Yeah. No, I mean the angels, like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so it was kind of like, I can't think of too many questions to try to cut to the chase with a group of men that were, you know.
That would do it.
Yeah.
My only thinking about that is, it was before in the earlier chapter that God already decided he was gonna destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Yeah, in desperation, did he add, that's a good, I have to think on that one.
There's zero people zero men that said, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
not a good deal.
Yeah.
I have to ponder that. I just still struggle with the dad saying that.
But isn't there another story?
Judges
in one
chapter
of the Judges,
19.
yeah, that
Yeah, the same thing happens in Judges 19 when a man comes from the hills. He's been chasing this woman around for his concubine. He finally gets her, and the same thing happens. They beat on his door, and they take her outside, and it says they had sex with her all night long. She came in and died, and as a warning, he cut her into little pieces, put them on burros, and sent them as a warning to all other nations. This is what happens when you mess with God. That's Judges 19.
Wasn't it 12 pieces, one for each tribe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To me, it's one of the minor proofs that the Bible is written by God and not, that God worked through men to write it, but it's God's word, is because these are the kind of stories that if you were writing them about your life, you wouldn't tell anyone. I'm not gonna tell you that part. I'm gonna tell you all the glory stories, right? And not the bad stories.
When we think there's a lot of wickedness, you just have to go back and read the Old Testament and realize that it's been here for thousands of years.
I always got uncomfortable when my kids were in their teen years and they said, well, Dad, what were you like? I studied my Bible all day long. No. But I would simply say that your dad has made mistakes so that you don't have to. We're at verse 23 now.
27.
Oh, thank you. Abraham got up early that morning and hurried out to the place that he had stood in the Lord's presence. So that's where God confirmed the promise. He goes back to that place of promise. He looked out across the plain towards Sodom and Gomorrah and watched as columns of smoke rose from the cities like smoke from a furnace. But God had listened to Abraham's request and kept Lot safe, removing him from the disaster that engulfed the cities in the plain. So there's a little bit of Jesus that you can, and I think we ought to always look for Jesus in the stories of the scripture. You see that in that Abraham's concern was for the welfare of somebody that he loved, and he would intercede and pray on their behalf, which is what Jesus does for us. He intercedes and prays on our behalf for our welfare. The fact that Jesus is a man of prayer is no secret if you read the New Testament. It seemed to be his first thing to do every morning was to pray. Jason and I work together. We're always the first ones in the office. He comes in late, like half an hour after I do.
Late, 7 o'clock, that's late.
That's late. It's almost lunchtime. I get up typically at 4:30 because I like my quiet time in the morning. And I can take the dog potty. I can't talk to God till I've had at least one cup of coffee, and then I'm ready. And the dogs settle down, it's quiet in the house, and that's my quiet, reflective time. Which is really hilarious because up until like 10 years ago, I was a night owl. But no longer, I'm an early morning guy. And on weekends, there's nothing like sitting on the patio when God wakes up creation, and that is a great time. If you have a particular time that works best for you, try to guard that as much as you can and utilize that as your prayer time, your quiet time. It also works in the deer blind for me. Afterward, Lot left Zoar, the little place, because he was afraid of the people there. He seems to live a lot in fear. And if you look at scriptures, there is one remedy for fear. It's faith, which is why God, whenever God steps into the picture, talks to somebody, usually the first thing he says is, don't be afraid, have faith. And Lot seems to live in that fear. And he went to live in a cave in the mountains where he didn't want to go, right? With his 2 daughters. One day, the older daughter said to her sister, there are no men left anywhere in this entire area, so we can't get married like everyone else. And our father will soon be too old to have children. Come, let us get him drunk with wine, and then we can have sex with him. That way we will preserve our family line through our father. There's a number of things that are coming up in my mind around this whole story. Were there no other men living on the earth? Yes, there were lots of them. Not the kind of guys they were used to seeing in Sodom and Gomorrah. Those guys were gone. But they could have gone if that really was their drive, is that they wanted to get married and enjoy life with the family. There were other solutions than old dad, okay? There's also this incredible thing that God puts into to all of us, and it really shows itself in our teen years. It's called sex drive. Wouldn't it have been horrible for God to give us that and not allow us to have a means of expressing it, when all he says to us is, this is a powerful, awesome, cool gift. Wait till you're married and with your spouse, and y'all just have fun, right? That's my translation of that. But in the confines of the marriage relationship, the marriage covenant, if you will, it is a beautiful thing. Now, are they really that concerned about carrying on their family life, or are they wondering about this beautiful gift called sex? I don't know. It's just worth pondering out there. Yes, ma'am.
I mean.
Oh, I thought you were raising your
No.
hand. Okay. So they seem to have learned from old dad that usually the first solution is not the best one. So they want to get old dad drunk and drunk with wine and have sex with their father. So that night they got him drunk with wine. It doesn't seem like it was a difficult thing for them to do, because they're going to do it again the next night. The last time we heard about someone getting drunk with wine was Noah. And that's when his one son saw his nakedness. And the other two creeped in there. So wine and nakedness seem to go together. You might want to avoid wine. I'll leave that up to you. So that night they got him drunk with wine, and the older daughter went in and had intercourse with her father. He was unaware of her lying down or getting up, so they must have done a good job at getting him drunk. The next morning, the older daughter said to her younger sister, "I had sex with our father last night. Let's get him drunk with wine again tonight, and you go in and have sex with him. That way we preserve our family line through our father." So that night they got him drunk with wine again, and the younger daughter went in and had intercourse with him. As before, he was unaware of her lying down or getting up again. As a result, both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their own father. When the older daughter gave birth to a son, she named him Moab, and he became the ancestor of the nation known as the Moabites. When the younger daughter gave birth to a son, she named him Ben-Ammi. He became the ancestor of the nation now known as the Amorites. And if you were to put a list of people who were enemies of the Jewish people together, these two tribes would be high on that list. Which I think says something of the spiritual legacy that Lot didn't plant into them, carried on from generation to another generation, where the spiritual lineage that Abraham gave to his family carried on in a godly direction. See if I can read my note here.
And it also shows the faithfulness of God back over when, it mentioned, it said, that in verse 29, when he talked about God, remembered Abraham because they had made a covenant. And so, his word is everything, and he won't go back on it, because it wasn't Lot's, it wasn't because of Lot or the goodness in Lot or whatever, it's because he thought of Abraham and the covenant he made. And like you just said, that is the lineage that, we get as an example of who God and Jesus is and how we should be, and to keep our word and to remember the covenant God's made to us, and his grace and his mercy, so it's good to be aligned with him.
I think it would be an amazing thing to go back and to thank the people who planted Christ in your heart. And find out who planted Christ in their heart. Go back and see what that lineage looks like. On my side of the family, it was my mom's side. Stubborn old German Lutherans that beat it into their kids. And I'm sorry, I didn't quite mean it that way. But I know my grandma Haller because I grew up in an Air Force brat, so for Diana to have cousins that she actually knows who they are is like foreign to me. Family reunion was the dinner table for us because we moved all the time. But to have that spiritual lineage in my mom's side of the family, it was the women of that family. My mom poured Jesus into us. My dad was a believer too, and he helped mom, but mom was the dominant one. Her mom was the dominant one, and on back. But to think about who it was in your line of salvation that loved you enough to plant something in you that is eternal. And then look forward and see, who did you plant Christ in? Who are you going to plant Christ in? I am working on a young lady now that you have heard her story, but about a month ago at a ball game down at Starkey Park, there was a fracas in the front yard and shots were fired and a little girl was hit. I know that little girl's mom, and I see her almost every morning because she works at Cazadores, where I stop for a taco on my way to work. And little by little, I told her, she came back to work for the first time on Monday, and I was so excited to see you. How's your daughter? And she said, how did you know? And I said, because the day after it happened, you weren't at work, and I asked the lady who owned it what happened, and she told me. I said, I've been praying for you and your daughter every day since then. And you can just see the doors opening. And she wasn't there this morning, but you know, that's my person right now. If we can get that mom in a relationship to the Lord and get that kid, you know, where's that spiritual heritage going to go?
Amen.
Blessed to be a blessing, right? Ooh, I just teased the next chapter. So Father Abraham has his own sin problems. We're going to run into them next week, but I just want to simply say that, and you touched on it so beautifully. There was nothing about Lot that made God save him. There's nothing about Abraham that made God save him either, or get so involved in their lives. And that's where you see Jesus jump into the picture so clearly in this story for me. You see the heart of Jesus, that he's going to love Abraham even though he keeps confusing his wife as his sister. And the bad choices he makes. So Abraham's righteousness didn't come from inside of him. Lot's righteousness doesn't come from inside of him. Your righteousness doesn't come from inside you. It's given. It imputed, whatever word you're used to saying. I like the term that I learned in seminary was called forensic righteousness. Isn't forensics what you do on cadavers? Well, we're cadavers, except God spoke into us while we were yet sinners. Christ died for us. That passage, a beautiful passage from Paul. And that's what it was. There's nothing special about you or me that made God say, hey, I want that one. But we're in that lineage. And I love Paul's advice to young Timothy when he says, it is God's will that all would be saved and come to a knowledge of Christ Jesus. That's what God wants. That should be the desire of his people and of his church. And I'll close just by reminding you, there's three things God's always done. He's doing everything all the time, but there's three very special things to God, and that is bringing glory to the name of Jesus, growing his church, and reaching people who are right now far from him. And that's what God's doing. That's what the church ought to do. That's what we ought to do. That's what you were doing in Uganda with people you may never see again till you get to heaven.
That's their goal, is that the evangelical group that we're working with is that they have a goal of 2025. They're not going to make that. Too many unreached people groups, but I think by 2030 they will have reached every tribe and people group in Uganda with the gospel. Now that doesn't, just like they shared the gospel with probably 3 times the number that accepted Christ. But that's not what we're called to do. Love God, love people, and carry out the Great Commission. So,
but the mission field is not just over in Uganda.
no.
Well, I was gonna say, Brandy, when she came to the shop the other day, is it May Day that you're working with? Tell them a little about what y'all just got through doing with that.
So I'm blessed to be a part of a group of women that God's kind of been transforming, like the name of the ministry, but it's been like her voice and my friend, her name is Pastor Jenny Donnelly, and she's in Oregon, and God woke her up, and she's just very obedient. I think that's another side to, you know, what God is. The enemy's good at distracting us, and you know, and even we were talking about how back in the day, you know, when visitors came over to the house or whatever, everybody would just welcome them in, and now we're like, who's at the door, like, hi, everybody hide, you know? And so the people aspect or whatever has been like so difficult because the world has just gotten so ugly. But the Lord woke up my friend Jenny and he said, Jenny, I am going to, and her and her husband were very successful business, overnight lost their income, and God told her, you're gonna write books, you're gonna start a church and a ministry and create movements that will last for a lifetime in my kingdom. And so back right before the election, she, and the thing is, it wasn't even televised or anything. There was 375,000 people on the White House lawn. This one little girl obeyed Jesus and started contacting people and said, we're gonna stand. It's not about one way or the other, it's about the VIBLE. And we're gonna, you know, just pray for our nation and pray for salvation. And then so, literally like for 8 hours, we stood and prayed on the lawn at the White House in Washington DC, and so many radical things took place that day, but it started something. And so right after the election came and went, God woke her up and said, it's no time to lay down and be comfortable. It's May Day, May Day, May Day, May Day, and God just kept telling her May Day, May Day. And anyway, she's like, what? And then he said, I want you to go copy and paste Peru. And she's like, I don't even know what Peru. And so she looked it up, and in 2016, the government in Peru, George Soros, had his funding into the education, deep rooted into, the children and ideology, and basically, you know, this man was dealing with, you were talking about the homosexuality and the, transgender community and all these things, but it's now in the underbelly of the school. And one of our girlfriends had her child in Colorado taken away from them because they found out about an after-school Skittles program ran by known blood witch, gender, queer, transgender groups, and speaking and reading to second graders and third graders with mini skirts and body parts hanging out and this and that. So the exposure we're not even unaware of because it's being masked by our education system and being told not to tell the parents, that reckon the identities, as we all know. And again, it's not about the upset of, it's the spirit of it, right? And it's you can't stand for it. So she started looking into Peru, and this man, God had told him, you're gonna go swell the streets. You say yes and you obey, and I will bring the people to link arms with you. So he was like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. And so he went out and he just said, because they were being prisoned for calling the child by their, if you're a boy, you want to be a girl, the parents were being put in prison. And there were so many families. And it was like they were standing up and getting absolutely sick of this, but nobody used their voice. So basically, he said, God told him, he said, you hashtag this, don't mess with our kids. So they swelled to the streets, about 1 million people. And to this day, they overthrew the Prime Minister, George Soros, took out his funding, and the Secretary of Education was also ousted. And they have a family month now in Peru, lit up their White House, if you will, in pink and blue to stand for family and to use our voices and just say it's about our children, because it wasn't even about being a Christian or not, but the enemy knew that, like, if you can get to these kids, that's what you're wrecking our generation. Anyway, and so my friend found out about all this, and she was like, called us up, so we all gathered, and she's like, we are going to take and do a 5-city tour. God gave her the city, so we started in New York, went to Miami was the second one, Houston, we just had Houston May 18th, and then we had Seattle. It was all over the news. I don't know if you guys saw it. And then we ended it in LA last weekend. But basically what we did was we peacefully brought praise and worship to the streets. We gave out haircuts for kids, baptisms. We basically gave grocery cards for families, and we just rallied the community, get bicycles out, yes, and just ministered. And so many people in New York, it was literally on Times Square, and it was like we would go to the churches and we'd say, hey, it was Church Without Walls, like, would you partner us with you? This is what we're doing, don't mess with our kids. And people were like, we're not going into the city. It was so sad to see the church back down. And it's so hard because, but God, right? And they're like, okay, God, you got some trouble here. What are you gonna do with these churches, you know? But we went and it was literally awesome to see Times Square literally just praising and worship, and it began to flood and rain. And it just, you would thought people would have scattered, but they didn't. And I mean, and then Miami, same thing. And then Houston came and it was powerful. We had so much, you know, just good things poured out from that. But then when Seattle came, the enemy's now really mad. So they had a group of witches and warlocks, and they and the mob and the Antifa and the surround us and attack us. And we were peacefully processed. We had our permits were given by the city, told us where we had to go, basically set us up from the mayor, set us up, and they were throwing water balloons with urine at us, gassing us. They were having sex right on the lawn in front of children. There was 23 arrests. It was so violent and so bad. You can just go hashtag don't mess with our kids. And they basically told, the mayor ended up writing in and saying that we were the attackers and that we were
Yeah,
it was terrible. Right-wing extremists, and they were proud of their country, the city was proud of their stance for what they believed in. And so we ended up staying in Seattle, and we stood on the city because God was like, stand up. Like we think that we have to, I always, you know, I just like grew up in religion and not ever relationship. And so I think for so long, I just appreciate relationship and just not thinking you have to be a wimpy Christian because you have a voice, but just to also be honoring and integritous and staying, like you said, not apologizing for what God says, because we stand on the Bible and that's what you do, and you can love. And so that's what we did. We were just loving, and even in addressing City Hall and the mayor and whatever, we just said we want an apology, or we want him overthrown. And now it went to the FBI. They're investigating all the things. The White House now has gotten the main attention, and they just declared today, we actually got word of it, that they're about to sign off on our petition to have, just like LGBTQ has Pride Month and whatever, we're gonna have Family Month. And so this is where you're gonna see families being, or we're gonna basically be putting in the cities everywhere, like in the Family Month, like free gatherings for Church Without Walls. Just come, bring your family. We want to stand together and give into the community and this and that. But it made such an impact, and it was just awesome because, you know, we just sit back and become lazy because we get in this, I don't want to deal with it, I'm not answering my door. We separate ourselves from it and we stay in the church. But evangelism, and like you're saying, is reaching out. And so that's kind of what we have done. It's called Don't Mess With Our Kids. And so it's been a really awesome thing to see the Holy Spirit really pour himself out when you're bold enough to say yes. And the younger generation is what is so powerful, when you were seeing 7-year-olds just weep and cry because they were touched by God, and then just homeless. And even we had a situation in Seattle where people were standing in line now to detransition because God so touched their hearts.
Wow.
So it was really powerful. So yeah, so that's kind of what you were saying you were doing, but yeah.
Big stuff.
I'm glad you asked her what she's been doing. That was powerful.
It has definitely come with attack though.
Yes.
It's not for the weak.
Well, Jesus said you will be persecuted. He didn't say you might.
No, that's true.
There, and I understand that there's a spirit of fear on churches. I know a lot of my friends that in the past year have been afraid to speak out because of the political threat that could come if you make a stand. And that's why we got to get outside of that fear and start living on faith.
What I really appreciate, I just want to say, because I was, she told me that at first thing because we're new here, we're transplants, and so I've really prayed God to help me find my people, but I want kingdom minded, you know, women and family, and but I was going to say that you've been so precious, and her spirit, and she remembered my name. I had came in our first year, and it's literally been almost a
It's
year.
almost been a year.
I know, and I walked in and I was like, I remembered her, but we've had just life hit us and all the things. But she was like, Brandy, I'm like, my name? Wow, I'm not that impressive.